Let's get more on this from Kadir Ustun, who's the executive director of the SETA Foundation here in Washington. He joins me in the studio. Kadir, great to have you back. How do you think this support will be perceived, the U.S. support, in terms of the humanitarian assistance and the ammunition? How do you think that that's going to be perceived by the Turkish government, given that the Turkish request for Patriots is only being considered by the Department of Defense?
Well, I think there's quite a bit of disagreement within the U.S. government on this. People who are running the Syria policy in the U.S. government under the leadership of James Jeffrey are very sort of keen on working with Turkey much more closely, but others disagree because of what happened last year. Turkey pushed really hard for the U.S. to drop its support for the YPG. There's quite a bit of sort of bad blood left over from that time. But these are NATO allies. They need to work together. I think the Syria team recognizes that, and they're doing their best to kind of come to a new sort of momentum in the relationship. But it's not going to be easy, obviously, because of Department of Defense. They're not quite there yet. But it is important that U.S. listens to Turkey's requests. Of course, it's also dependent upon what happens in the during the March 5th meeting between Erdogan and Putin that's supposed to happen in Moscow, and whether there will be an agreement on de-escalation or it will continue to escalate.
That was going to be one of my questions, which is, given the uptick in incidents that we've seen between the Turkish military and the Syrian regime forces, what can Turkey's president and Russia's president achieve when they meet on Thursday?
Well, it's a difficult situation because Turkey has shown it's not willing to just pack up and go away from Idlib. It is requiring the regime to pull back to Sochi lines. Sochi agreement basically said that Idlib was a deconfliction zone and there's 3.5 million civilians there. And the regime is trying to take over Idlib, but of course, as they've done before elsewhere, they need to empty out those areas because they can't really hold places with a lot of population, and Russia supports that. So there's this strategic town of Sarakib that connects Aleppo with Damascus. There's intense fighting there between Turkish-supported opposition and the regime forces, and it's hard to see, to be honest, whether Erdogan and Putin can come to an agreement, come to a ceasefire agreement, and then the broader question of whether Sochi lines hold.
Secondarily, I guess separately in this whole conflict, we're seeing a statement of support from the EU for Greece during the refugee crisis. What's Turkey's strategy from that point?
Well, Turkey is now, Turkey has been yelling and screaming about this for a long time, and they've been saying enough is enough, this is very bad, you need to, Europe has to pay attention, US, the international community must pay attention to this. But all those calls fell on deaf ears, and they've modified the refugee policy now that the original 2015 agreement between Europe and Turkey was not fully implemented by the EU. They failed to provide funds, they've failed to provide visa liberalization for Turkish citizens. So Turkey is saying that now that you didn't honor that agreement, now we are not going to prevent refugees who are trying to get to Europe. Of course, the number is more than 100,000 that are trying to cross over to Europe, and now they're very focused on that. And that's the sad part that kind of proves Turkey's point. Europe is paying attention only when thousands of refugees are at their borders, but on the other hand, there are millions of displaced Syrians inside Syria, and then millions of refugees outside.
I guess my question is, if the EU is going to back Greece in all of this and endorse the fact that Greece is going to suspend those asylum applications, what are Turkey's next steps?
Well, when it comes to the refugee situation, Turkey is already hosting 3.7 million. It's going to host them. Turkey is not trying to push them out. It's just saying that I'm not going to spend resources on trying to prevent refugee outflows from Turkey. So it doesn't change a lot of the situation, but it does get Europe's attention, and that's the point. And of course, Europe has to put a lot more muscle, diplomatic muscle, in basically pressuring Russia and the Assad regime and trying to stop. They need to help Turkey stop that regime push towards Idlib.
Yeah. Kadir Ustun, really appreciate your expertise. Thanks for coming on.